Evening and welcome back. More than 10,000 COVID conspiracy theorists gather in London. A huge crowd of anti-vaxxers, led by David Icke, gather to argue that the virus is a lie, spread in a secret global plot organised by Bill Gates. And it isn't just in London. In fact, we've seen it all across Europe happening on the 29th of August. That is how the people are deciding to try and get their message out, to say that we're not looking for a second lockdown, and actually it should be more down to the individual to decide for themselves if they want to be locked down or if they want to wear a mask. If they don't want to interact with other people, then it should be down to the individual to decide for themselves. And that is why what we're seeing here is, of course, being suggested that they're all conspiracy theorists and anti-vaxxers, instead of just people who wish to be able to decide for themselves, because the conspiracy theories that they're saying are going into what the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation has done before when it comes to vaccinations, for example. It's also been looking into the response to the coronavirus, and also how deadly it has been, depending on the particular people who have been affected and how long it's actually been about, and then how effective the lockdown has been. That is to say that Bill Gates has spoken about a coronavirus at length before this one came about, and he's said before how vaccinations would lower the global population, and his vaccinations have purposefully sterilized people who have received it. That is something that they have openly admitted to with their vaccinations out in India. And when it comes to the death numbers, then of course we've seen that they've been inflated by having people who have been diagnosed with coronavirus then being put down as a coronavirus death, even if they've never actually been tested positive. It's just they've had similar symptoms and then died from something completely unrelated, which is why we've heard the term comorbidities so much. And then also, if the lockdowns have been effective, and therefore we're looking out to Sweden quite a lot, and also how it's affected Britain, and then what New York has done in putting their COVID patients into old people's homes. And that, of course, increases the number dramatically, because old people are more likely to be vulnerable and die sooner than anybody else, and therefore they have died. So that's what they're getting at when they say conspiracy theorists and anti-vaxxers. They're being actually very specific about the vaccinations that they don't wish to accept. And I'm aware that you might be thinking that David Icke is a bit of a conspiracy theorist and not somebody that you'd like to take seriously a lot of the time. But when he's calling out what's going on, that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and if he's got these valid points that he wishes to raise and he's bringing attention to, then of course I'm going to be on his side and supporting that message as well. And when he decides to mention that forced vaccinations is a symptom of fascism, then I think we can all agree with that and say, well, yeah, that's definitely right. And if you wish to go into how masks being muzzles or the negative effects of masks, then of course that's definitely true. You've got decreased oxygen supply because you're not breathing in as much as you were before, because now you've got a mask in front of your face. You've also got to take into consideration that they've got damp masks, which means then that you're recirculating your carbon dioxide as well as other things that are going on the mask that you're then inhaling. And also then the social side of things, to say that you wouldn't be able to see the people smiling at you, you wouldn't have that interaction that you've had before. And when it comes to children not being able to interact, then we've seen various studies of infants where if they are not touched, they will die, even if they're fed and watered and got all the nutrition and nourishment that they need. If they're not touched in the first few months of their life, then they will die. And it's same sort of thing to show just how important it is for the kinesthetics of touch And if you're not getting that, then of course it's going to have detrimental effects for people. So, as we've got saying, one man says this is a political agenda to commit mass genocide on the population. That is their agenda. And maybe genocide is taking it a bit far. However, then you got to look into the police response from this and seeing that it's just down to politics at the end of the day, that they're not actually caring about how many people there are or what precautions they're putting into place. It just comes down to the politics. So if you've got Afghanistan Independence Day, Pakistan Independence Day, or Black Lives Matter riots, then it's going to be fine. But if you've got people saying that they're not appreciating what the government is doing when it comes down to COVID-19, even though, of course, it's an ethnically diverse group, then that is when there's going to be trouble, and police are going to be there and arresting people because of that. And they've tried to say, as in the police, have said that, well, we have to do this because we've warned them, and if they're not complying, then we're going to have to arrest them. And it's the same thing that we're seeing in Berlin as well. That's the other main one. And from these photos, of course, you can see the big police presence where some of them are wearing masks. Some of them aren't. But let's not point out the hypocrisy there. And they were actually peaceful protesters, I think with one exception. But it's difficult to find exact details on it. But there did seem to be one fire caused, which was down to a few people. So with the exception of that, then yes, but that is still unclear as to exactly what has happened. So for the most part, if not the whole part, peaceful protests the whole time. So a poster advertising the event read, "Nothing is more important as time is very short. The government are voting for a 2-year extension of their emergency COVID-19 powers in September 2020. The first 6 months was a disaster. This must not be allowed to continue. We have to take a stand." It lists its priorities as no more lockdowns, no social distancing, no masks, no track and trace, no health passports, no mandatory vaccinations, no new normal, restore all human rights that have been violated. And it's definitely a true thing to say that demanding the people stay inside and that they're not allowed outside or they have to be wearing particular things, that is definitely a human rights violation when it comes down to freedom of expression, freedom of movement, freedom of just being free at the end of the day. And of course, we did have some people wearing masks around here as well, but it was the very, very minority, and predominantly just to try and cause more of a point, as we see this person here who's put on their bland, faceless mask with a mask over the front in order to try and show the muzzling effects that the masks have. And of course that is what they've come to mean at this point, that it isn't down to lowering infections. I think we can pretty much all agree on that at this point. And what David Icke was pointing out was, so you've got to stay 2 meters away. So now the virus is a tape measure. If you're with somebody from not your household, you can't stay longer than 15 minutes. So apparently now they've got a clock as well. And then saying that masks are going to be mandatory in a week. So now apparently the virus has a calendar as well. So it does all seem to be very convenient for whatever the government wishes to push, as long as they put it under the guise of having this COVID-19 as a reason, then it seems that they can get away with pretty much anything. That is the main gist of his argument. And it is a decent point. So it is lovely to see that we have 18,000 marches in Berlin, which the police broke up because they were failing to socially distance. What a surprise. We've also got it in Paris and in Copenhagen, of course London as previously stated, but throughout Europe people are taking a stand or taking the knee to protest this because enough is enough. And even if the ideal is there that it's supposed to be saving people's lives, that at the end of the day, if people aren't allowed to get out and produce, earn money and receive, then they're not going to have a life at all. And the government doesn't produce anything, it just takes from people, and if you're lucky, will give it back to some people. But it doesn't make anything itself. So if you're stopping people from creating things, then you're not going to have a country. And the individuals that you're ruling over are not going to have a life either. That is why we're seeing the response that we have. But there's the good news for all of you. So it's a nice weekend break, if you will, to say that, yes, people are actually having enough of this and protesting in the thousands, which is always a nice thing to see. And we're hoping that there will be enough pushback from this, especially given the response has been very different from when it is politics that they agree with. If it's a kind of Black Lives Matter protest or riot, then they're going to be fine with that. But if it comes down to being for individual liberty and freedom, then they're of course not going to be okay with that. And when it comes down to mandatory vaccinations, there has actually been more talk of that, not least because it comes down to being a immunity passport and something that could be put within you and be scanned in order to know if you've been vaccinated or not without having to carry around a written record of it, as has already been proven successful in animal cadavers, and they're hoping to pioneer into areas where they don't have enough paper or documentation so that they can always carry it around with them. But I'm sure we're going to see that coming around to us as well. And yes, also the point of the vaccinations is because, unlike with pretty much all other viruses we've ever known, is that if you survive it, then you're not guaranteed to be immune. But if you get a vaccination, then you are, which is really screwy as to just how the virus and vaccinations are supposed to work. Because if you've had it, your body remembers you've had it, and it will prevent you from getting sick again, unless the virus changes too much, in which case your body won't remember it because it's too different. But the way that a vaccine works is it gives you a part of the virus so that your body remembers it, so that if it gets it again, it will get rid of it. But again, if the virus changes too much, then it won't remember it and the vaccination will be useless. So if immunity doesn't work, then I don't see how the vaccinations are going to work either. But as always, let me know what you guys think down below. If you think this is just the start and actually things are going to get better from this, because if people aren't allowed to go back to work, then there's not really much they can do except for protest until they're allowed back to work. So let me know. Always intrigued to hear what you guys have to say. But as always, until next time, have a good one.